The Boston Celtics are not indestructible. Bronny James scores his first points, and we got round one of Chet versus Wemby. So much to get to here on this edition of Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On NBA. Thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers right now, you can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com right now to get started. I'm Doug Branson, host of Locked On Hornets, and your Shot Clock Sherpa, guiding you through the NBA's biggest stories with the help of Locked On's local experts. And with me are two of Locked On's premier national NBA experts from the Locked On Nuggets podcast and senior writer for the Action Network. We've got Matt Moore. And from the Locked On Bulls podcast, it's Hayes. Matt and Hayes, you were watching a lot of basketball alongside everyone else last night, and the most exciting game was an OT thriller between the undefeated Boston Celtics and Indiana Pacers, but Boston Celtics undefeated no more. Pascal Siakam's tie-breaking three in OT sealed the upset for the Pacers, but they were up 19 in the fourth quarter before Boston stormed back to force that extra period. Hayes, how much should Pacers fans actually be celebrating this victory, when you take into context that comeback?
They absolutely should. This is their biggest victory on the season so far. They should be celebrating it. Now they need to ask themselves, are they going to be able to go out and keep up this level of performance and keep it up? Like the Pacers, we know what they're capable of offensively. The problem with the Pacers is their defense has been utterly trash for the last couple of years. And so, they're going to be a team that wins a lot of regular season games, and they should be excited about that. But the question is how much are they going to show over this regular season to show that maybe they could take that final next step and then maybe finally make it to the finals?
I'll say they should probably chill out a little bit. Look, Boston was probably due for one of these games. They look so unstoppable, and whenever that happens, there's some warning signs, which we'll talk about in a sec. But look, the bigger thing to me is Indiana can't be this team that's they beat Boston, but they lost to this other team, but they beat Boston, but you have to be more consistent. This team's got to figure out who they are and try and stabilize a little bit. It's great. Beat Boston. That's awesome. You're a bad matchup for them. You need to be able to prove that you can be consistent night to night. That's a big issue for this team that they got to settle pretty quick if they want to be able to get the regular season wins that they're looking for.
Pascal Siakam, 29 points in this game. Ben Mathurin, 30 points. Both of those bested Tyrese Halliburton, who did have 12 assists but only 17 points. Matt, has it surprised you how little noise we've heard from Tyrese to open the season versus Pascal Siakam?
A little bit. There's a lot of talk. I got a lot of people in my mentions being like, Halliburton's so overrated. How could you think he was good? And I'm like, okay, let's maybe chill out over 5 games. It's going to be fine. But I will say, look, the shot hasn't been there. He does look very, he has this habit of just not taking over games to the degree that he should. And he's got to really grow into that pretty quickly. It's great that he's able to create as much as he does for that offense, but he's got to be able to do more for them. And he's been pretty passive. The numbers are not as good as they were last year. He needs to improve if they're going to get back where they want to go.
He's going to have to get better. I mean, he's still taking the most shots on that team, if I'm not mistaken, but he's not having the best performance. And when Ben Mathurin, who I do absolutely love Ben Mathurin, is consistently outperforming Tyrese Halliburton from a scoring standpoint, you just need more from Halliburton than that. It'd be different if we're talking about Halliburton taking a step back offensively, but taking this huge step defensively. He's not. He needs to be better over the course of this season for sure.
All right, let's flip it over to the Boston Celtics. And you were sort of teasing it, Matt. They've got some issues, and one of those issues could be the Indiana Pacers. Let's hear more from John Corrales of the Locked On Celtics podcast.
Play a style that the Celtics have trouble with. Boston is so good at identifying weaknesses and going at a stylistic thing. The Knicks with Karl-Anthony Towns and Jalen Brunson on the floor. The Celtics have a plan for that. And the Knicks are going to play a certain way. You know that. You can kind of predict it, and you can game plan for it. But the Pacers don't play a specific way other than a little chaotic up and down the floor. When you miss, they are running as fast as they can, and they're making you make mistakes. When you get drawn into their own pace, their own style of play, you kind of get yourself into trouble. Boston now has to treat the Pacers like they treat New York, like they treat Milwaukee, like they treat Philly. The Pacers are a singular problem for the Boston Celtics.
Okay, Hayes, do you buy John Corrales' chaos theory that the way the Pacers play presents a particular problem for the Boston Celtics, maybe now, maybe in the postseason? What do you think?
Yeah, I do. I think that every team has their Achilles heels. Every team, no matter how good they have that one team that, whether it be matchups or whatever else, they just don't match up well against them. And the Pacers very well could be that for the Boston Celtics. Now, I will say this. If it comes down to trusting the Boston Celtics or the Indiana Pacers in the playoff series, I'm going to trust the Boston Celtics because they're so good at taking away what other teams do well. But I'm not surprised that the Pacers are a matchup problem for the Boston Celtics, but they won't be a playoff problem for the Boston Celtics until further notice.
I don't agree. I can't get with you there because, look, Joe Mazzulla talked about how tough that Pacers matchup was. And everybody's like, yeah, but they swept them. Okay, but we know the injury situations, and we know all the other things, and we know how close game one was. I think the bigger problem here, there's two things going on here with Boston. One, they have problems with teams that play to extreme ends. So they struggled last year with Minnesota because Minnesota was all defense, very little offense. They struggle with the Pacers because the Pacers are the opposite. These teams that are extreme, Boston has an issue with. When Boston faces balanced squads, they squash them because you're never going to be as good on offense as them or as good on defense as them. But that defensive problem is the other part of this, which has not been good enough for Boston yet this season. I think there's a little bit of coasting, a little bit of like, look at all the threes we're making. We don't need to play defense. And they've gotten a little bit away from that identity. That's a little bit worrisome. It's one of the reasons I don't necessarily think that Boston is as good as the record or numbers show. They got to tighten up a little bit more. They're coasting a little bit, I think, on the championship rush right now.
And are they coasting a little bit on the backs of their two superstars in Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown? Because if you look at the box score on this one, you've got 25 field goal attempts for Tatum, you've got 30 for Brown, and only 9 for Derek White, Drew Holiday only 9 attempts, Peyton Pritchard 14 attempts. Are they too reliant on their stars? And is that part, does that play a part in what you're talking about there, Matt, where they have trouble adjusting to teams that play one extreme or the other?
No, because I think the offense has been awesome. The offense has been elite. I don't think the offense is the issue. And I think Tatum has been so good. This is not a bad plan. Some of this with Brown is Brown's trying to keep up where he was last year. But the problem is he was really good because of the lineups with Kristaps Porzingis. And without KP, Jalen's just a different type of player. And he's got to kind of probably mold a little bit back into that. But look, Derek White, Drew Holiday, Al Horford, Peyton Pritchard, these guys should not be high volume guys. You should be led by your two best players. And the offensive stuff, again, has been awesome. If they're going to get it done, though, it's going to be better on the defensive end. And some of that, I will say quite honestly, is like Drew Holiday's getting up there in years, and he has really good moments, but I'm just a little bit worried about some cracks in the veneer of the Boston Celtics defense.
Well, I didn't play this part of the Locked On Celtics podcast, but we did finally start to see some cracks in the veneer of the three-point shooting volume of the Boston Celtics, at least in terms of what John Corrales thought about it. He thought there were too many three-point attempts in this particular game. Hayes, do you give any credence to the volume issue with the superstars or to their three-point volume in terms of the issues that they had in this game?
I'm not worried about the volume to the stars. I think that's what you want to do. You want your other players to play off those guys. They're so good. As far as the three-point volume, you're going to run into eventually where hopefully it doesn't happen for a series. Hopefully it doesn't happen for a 4 or 5 game stretch, but you're going to get cold eventually from three. It's going to happen. And to Matt's point, before they've had that defensive identity to be able to rely on when they have that. So they're going to have to get back to that because it's going to come. They're going to go through a cold shooting stretch. And usually it's been their defense and how they attack the perimeter that helps them with that.
Okay, so the Celtics no longer undefeated, but there is a couple of teams that stayed undefeated last night. Coming up, Bronny got the headlines last night for the Los Angeles Lakers, but the Cavaliers made the statement in that game. Are the Cavs finally for real? Matt and Hayes discuss that next. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, the NBA, so many sports, all in one place. So when you get that hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And I was just checking on some lines for tonight's game, and the line moved as I was checking it on the over-under for Houston Rockets, Dallas Mavericks, which now sits at 227.5. Visit FanDuel.com today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. More Locked On NBA ahead. Thanks for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. Your favorite NBA team has a free daily newsletter. Go to LockedOnDaily.com, subscribe, and stay up to date with local expert analysis, and you get amazing writing from Katie Heindel, Mike Shearer, and Locked On Fantasy Basketball tips from Josh Lloyd. It's really great. Again, LockedOnDaily.com to subscribe. Okay, big story out of this Cavs-Lakers game was Bronny getting into the game late and scoring his first points in front of a very warm Cleveland Cavaliers crowd. Let's hear from Andy Kamenetsky of the Locked On Lakers podcast with his take on Bronny's insertion into the game and then the moment that he scored his first points.
Bronny did a good enough job. Like, he had a really nice jumper that he connected on. He had a couple
mid-range baseline thing for his first NBA points.
Yeah, it was a really nice sequence. He had a couple assists. He had a steal. And the moment got to be his. Mm-hmm. It actually got to be his moment, which the crowd was really excited about. They were chanting for Bronny. It didn't feel manufactured, and it didn't feel like it was about something else. Like, how do LeBron and Bronny engineer the moment together? Like, I thought this was great.
Okay, Matt, when he said it wasn't manufactured, I saw your face physically squint. It sort of, it almost imploded, I think, when that was said. So you'll get the first crack here. Do you agree with, I think it's obvious, maybe you don't agree with Andy here. What are your thoughts? Was this more Lake show than Lake substance? What are we talking here?
I mean, look, I don't think it was manufactured in the moment, right? Like, it wasn't built like the first one was, where it was like, we're going to do this. And like, everyone should know we're going to do this. Like, Bronny grew up there. So there's a real relationship there. Like, LeBron is like the favorite son. And so there's a real appreciation from the Cavs crowd. And I thought that moment was really great. I genuinely did. However, any other second round pick gets into the game and has a nice jumper and a couple of assists, and we're not all like, what an incredible moment. Like, it's fine. But like, he said it was about Bronny. No, it's not. It's still about his dad. Everything's about his dad. That's why this is a thing, is everything is about his dad. And that's unfortunate for the kid. I think he deserves a chance to make his own moments. But let's just be clear. Any other second rounder gets this type of performance, and we're not like, what a beautiful moment. We're just like, yeah, good. Nice job. Guy's first points. That's cool.
He got his first points. He went 1 for 2 from the field. Like, everything about this, I'm sorry, I know I'm a big pessimist with this, is manufactured. This whole thing is manufactured. So while the moment itself may have not been like, let's make sure Bronny gets his bucket. Listen, Bronny needs to be in the G League. He needs to be developing. He shouldn't even have come out of the NBA yet, in my opinion. I not to say that the kid doesn't have talent that can't be grown and can't be developed, but at this point, like, this whole thing, the fact that we're even making it a thing is it's all manufactured to me. All of it.
This is locked on dated NBA right now. Locked on.
I was going to say, it's not warm your heart at all? Not just the father son, coming together and embracing this moment, but then you had him doing it in Cleveland, and Cleveland, the fans appreciating their favored son and their favored son's son. And I think that was a great moment, wasn't it? I mean, it didn't touch you at all.
I genuinely think that the crowd reaction to Bronny was great. Like, that was a nice moment. But when Andy's talking about, like, it was about Bronny, no, it's still about his dad. The only reason anyone cares is because his dad's LeBron James. And again, I don't think that's his fault. Like, I'm never going to blame Bronny in any of this. So much of this is out of his control, and that's driven me nuts. The kid needs to have a little bit more control and say over what's happening in his life. But I just can't get there on like, oh, it's like this was like a completely authentic moment. Well, no, like, it's partially manufactured, the concept of it, but also I do believe that people really enjoyed that moment, and that's cool. Like, that moment itself, outside of all of our jadedness, that moment was cool.
I can admit that it's cool.
Go ahead, Ez.
I can admit that it's cool, especially for the people in Cleveland. But as far as you ask, did it move my heart or warm my heart? No. I'm sorry if that makes me. No, not at all.
Hayes, you have a cold heart, and I love it. All right, let's move to the Cavs and see if this warms your heart at all. The Cavs made an absolute statement in this game, and it was not just Donovan Mitchell, and that's what Danny Cunningham talked about on the Locked On Cavaliers podcast. Let's hear from him.
Things that I have seen with the Cleveland Cavaliers through the first 5 games is it feels like it's a different player that's carrying the load every night. Like tonight, early on, it felt like Donovan Mitchell, it was his time to step up. And then I thought it shifted to Jarrett Allen, where he was terrific. He had 20 points, 17 rebounds. He was a big reason why the Cavs won. And then late in the game where, yeah, the game was probably out of reach, but the Lakers they're a frisky team. You know, you cut it to 15. Anything can happen in today's NBA. If they get hot from 3, which they didn't, but anything can happen. Evan Mobley was the guy that shut the door. And then you go back to Monday. Darius Garland carried them in the second half against New York. The Cavs right now are more dangerous than I think they've been at any time since Donovan Mitchell arrived.
Boom. Bold statement from Danny Cunningham of the Locked On Cavs podcast. Matt, do you agree? Is this the most dangerous the Cavs have been since Donovan Mitchell arrived?
Yes, and it's a great thing that they're doing that 6 months before the playoffs start. Like it's great, but you got to keep it up, right? Like this consistency has to be there. I will say I was really impressed with them last night. They outclassed LA last night. It wasn't just shooting here. It was Mitchell had a wild run. This was a 12-point game with 2:37 to go, and they closed on a 14-3 run. Like it was wild. It was an 8-point game and they closed on a 14-3 run. It was a wild sequence from Mitchell and the shooters. They have balance. Their defense is continuing. Jarrett Allen owned Anthony Davis last night. Really impressive performance by him. Evan Mobley just trashed that team from start to finish. They are getting all these contributions. Kenny Atkinson has done great work so far. I'm impressed with the Cavs, but man, we just got a long way to go before we get too far ahead here.
I'm very, very impressed with this Cleveland Cavaliers team. I love the way that they're playing basketball right now, and the fact that how they're spread. It's a different guy almost every night, and they're doing it together as a team. This seems like the closest realization they had for the reason why they doubled down on this core. They re-signed everybody. Like it's beautiful basketball to watch, and it's really good to see. Now, I may be a bit more of a believer in the Cleveland Cavaliers than Matt is, but they still do have a lot that they need to prove, a lot of season left to play. They need to prove that they can stay healthy. They need to prove when they do face some big adversity, or they're going to go back to where it's heavy Donovan Mitchell. But other than that, like through this part of the season, this beginning part, I love what I've seen from the Cleveland Cavaliers so far.
It's all rosy in Cleveland. They remain undefeated. So does Oklahoma City. And in fact, in the last decade, the final undefeated team, as we see which one of these is going to be the final undefeated team, maybe they both go down at the same time. But the final undefeated team has lost in the first round more times in the last decade, 3, than they've won the finals. That's only happened twice in the last decade, the 14-15 Golden State Warriors and last season's Boston Celtics. So we'll see. And speaking of the Oklahoma City Thunder, coming up, Chet Holmgren and Victor Wembanyama matched up for the first time this season, and it had me feeling like one was way more ready to take over the NBA than the other. We'll see what Matt and Hayes think with a game of Gimme More, our first recurring segment, up next on Locked On NBA. Thanks again for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. There is a free daily Locked On podcast for your favorite NBA team as well. Search your favorite podcast app or YouTube for Locked On and your favorite team today. So there were 11 games last night, lots of hot NBA storylines going on, but I'm like a kid prowling the streets on Halloween. I want more, and I'm looking for the house that gives out king-size candy bars. We're going to play Gimme More here on the show. I give you an NBA game, and you tell me if it was more about one thing or more about another thing. And speaking of king-size candy bars, we had a couple going at each other. Chet versus Wemby. It was round 1 of year 2 of this rivalry, and Rylan Stiles of Locked On Thunder takes us through the results.
He's, the worst game of his career. And Chet, on the other hand, who was working Zach Collins whenever Wemby got hurt. Chet was 7 for 10 from the floor, 3 for 3 from beyond the arc, 2 for 2 at the charity stripe, 5 boards, 2 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks, 19 points, plus 8 in the game. I think that what you're seeing here is the Thunder have dominated this quote-unquote rivalry since it became a thing, but I don't think that this is just indicative of like Chet versus Wemby, or the Thunder have Wemby's number, or Chet has Wemby's number. I just think that the Thunder have the Spurs number in the sense of what the Spurs lack is shooting, and what the Spurs lack is an ability to threaten you from beyond the arc. So what can the Thunder do? They can cross-match on Wemby and play J-Dub on him primarily. Heck, they've even had possessions where Kaysen and AJ Mitchell were on Wemby. And Wemby just cannot handle the basketball right now. He's got to refine that part of his game.
Okay, so Oklahoma City gets the win, 105-93. He mentioned Victor Wembanyama's terrible game. He called it the worst game of his career, 6 points on only 5 attempts. Here's the question. Give me more. Matt, is this more about Chet's early season dominance, or is this more about Wemby's struggles to counter what defenses are throwing at him so far this season?
It's more about Wemby. He's just not refined enough. Like, he's just not. And, he talked about that with the with where his handle's at. That's part of it. His positioning, his shot selection. Like, I've just been really underwhelmed by Victor's offensive game this season. And defensively, he's still able to be pushed around quite a bit. There's a lot of work to be done. I think they got to find better ways to get him in tandem with Chris Paul and Stephen Castle. I think they got to get more opportunities to get him some easy stuff, but he's also got to work a little bit more on his go-to moves. Jaren Jackson had this problem for the first couple of years, and Wemby's a much better talent than Jaren was at this point in his career. But like, Jaren didn't have a go-to move until like year 4. You've got to be able to build those things into your game. That's the bag, right? You've got to be able to have those things that you can get to that are going to make it difficult for defenders to expect or defend what it is that you're taking offensively. Chet's there for absolutely everything. And so I think it's more about Victor struggling and needing to refine a lot more work by the end of the season than it is about where Chet's at, even though Chet's been amazing.
I agree. It's more about Wemby right now, because it's not just about just this matchup either. Like, teams are starting to figure out how to guard Wemby. They're putting wings on Wemby, and Wemby settling for bad shots. 3 of his 5 shots last night were from 3-point, and then the other 2 were still jump shots. Wemby is not adapting to the NBA, adapting to him yet. Chet is a physical player. Chet will go inside, outside on you. Wemby right now is in a place where he's going to have to start, to Matt's point, adding to his bag. He has no bag right now. He's gotten by with more than that. And right now, the NBA is seemingly adjusting to him at a quicker rate than he's adjusting to the NBA. It's going to all work out itself. He's too good of a talent for not to end up. He'll be fine long term. But right now, everything's down across the board for Wemby. So it's more about Wemby for me.
Go watch Victor's highlights of his offensive stuff and go see if you're like, oh, I know what he's going to get to here, or if he's just kind of making it up on the fly. Now, being predictable is bad, but you do want some things where it's like, oh, there's the very clear, easy sequence here for him to get to, depending on what the defense does. And Wemby doesn't have that yet.
I shouldn't be, but I feel like I'm surprised by how quickly NBA defenses have figured this out. But he was such a storyline that I felt like, and such a focus that I feel like they have really gone to the laboratory to figure out how to cut this off early. Now, can they do it, long term? That's going to be the big question. It does make me think of this Zachary Risacher quote that's going out, the fellow Frenchman, who said that, in overseas he's an athletic guy, and then over here he's a regular dude. Like, it's just the NBA. The NBA is different. Okay, let's. We're going to stay on Oklahoma City, but we're actually going to go to a quote here from Draymond Green on his podcast, and this comes to us courtesy of a tweet from Clemente Almanza, who is the managing editor of the Thunder Wire at CAlmanza 1007. This is the tweet. Draymond Green talked about the Thunder in his latest podcast episode, said he's not a fan of the post-game interview tradition. Here's the quote from Draymond. The one thing I see about the OKC team that's alarming to me is their post-game. 7 guys in the interview. There's a certain seriousness it takes to win in this league, and there's a certain fear you have to instill in teams in order to win. I just don't know if they're instilling that fear in teams with all the bromance and stuff after the game, unquote. Hayes, before we discuss the messenger, let's start with whether or not you agree with this argument. Is this more about a legitimate issue with OKC being young and unserious, or is this more about Draymond Green's own issues with teammate relationships in the past?
It's definitely more about Draymond Green and his own team. Like, there's so much that you can actually criticize about the OKC Thunder and what they do, whether it's not hitting shots at the right time, whatever it is, if you want to talk basketball. But to say that it's because of their bromance and they have 7 people in the post-game interviews, come on, Draymond. We've seen it. We all know. You don't get along with your teammates. Like, Draymond got bigger things that he needs to worry about. He needs to worry about why he keeps dropping triple singles every night for the Golden State Warriors, more than worried about the OKC Thunder and their bromance.
Draymond is always in other people's business, and thinking that like there's one way for you to be able to compete in this league is very weird to me. You've got to be serious. You mean like seriously costing your team a championship by kicking some guy in the nut or hitting some guy in the nuts? Are you talking about getting suspended last season for 25 games? Is that serious? Like, I think Draymond's a very serious athlete. I think he's a very serious competitor, and he's a very serious businessman. But I'll also say this: the OKC is in that natural part in their life cycle, and the Warriors had this kind of youthful energy way back in the day too. But better than that, the Oklahoma City Thunder did back when it was Harden and Katie and Russ in the beginning, before the money gets in and changes everything. Like, you need to be able to enjoy this. Let OKC enjoy this time before everything gets jaded by the business side of the NBA. Yes, the Thunder can win a championship, but it's not going to be, if they do not win the championship, it's not going to be because they all get together for the post-game interviews. That kind of team chemistry stuff is still important in the NBA, and it honestly gets overlooked by players wanting to look too cool and too serious all the time.
Well, and there's a conflict, right? Because he's a podcaster, so of course he's up in everyone's business. That's what we do. This is the whole game, but he also plays this other game, and in that other game, this is not surprising to me at all, because you're talking about a guy who definitely is not bromancing with his teammates over the years, whether it's Kevin Durant or Jordan Poole. Like, there's always been some kind of issue there, so this doesn't surprise me at all. All right, let's move on. Final topic here for Give Me More, and that is Karl-Anthony Towns lighting the Heat up for 40-plus in a win over the Miami Heat. So let's go to Alex Wolf of Locked On Knicks, and we're going to go to Wes Goldberg of Locked On Heat for a little bit more intel on this big-time matchup.
It would probably be a good idea if the Knicks open up basically like most possessions when Brunson and Cat are on the floor with a pick and roll between those two, because this pick and roll works so well, and open the floor, open the offense up in such a pleasing way where, that you have all these people on the perimeter that you can kick the ball out to. All of them are capable of putting the ball on the floor for a moment. It's just, it really works. That's your ticket to becoming one of the top offenses in the NBA and potentially like the contender that you want to be.
All the Heat's issues from last season cropped up again in this one. A bad third quarter where they blow the lead. That was a last year issue. Losing games at home. That was a real big problem, especially in the second half of last year. The Heat are now 1-2 at home this season. It's very hard in professional sports, not even just the NBA. It's just very hard to change your identity and be something different when you have the same personnel.
So Karl-Anthony Towns, 44 points, 13 rebounds. Was this game more about him figuring it out, or maybe the Knicks figuring out how to best use him? Or was this more about the Heat, same personnel, same story as last season? Matt.
I will go, it's about the Heat and them just not being very good. So Bam got in foul trouble, and that opened the door for Cat to get going. Like, once Bam came back into the game, he actually did okay early on. Now, to Cat's credit, he adjusted late and was finishing through Bam. And like, those were the late highlights. But Cat was already going then. A lot of the work the defenders will talk about is you don't want to let guys get into that zone, because once they're there, it doesn't matter what you do. They're going to score anyway. But the foul trouble interrupted that. But offensively, like, the Heat offense just died. I mean, second half, it just fell apart. And you no longer have Jimmy Butler to hold you up anymore. He's not that guy. He period and dot. And if Bam's not that guy because he's too inconsistent and too passive, and Jimmy's not that guy because he's washed, what are the Heat going to rely on? You can move the ball all you want, but they're not going to be able to generate the shots. That's why Tyler Hero had a huge night. He was one of the few guys that could take and make contested shots. They do not have the guys to hang, even in the Eastern Conference this season.
I'm going to make it more about Cat just because I like to see Cat getting in this type of rhythm and build his confidence because I think that's going to be really important for this New York Knicks team. And he did take advantage of what was in front of him, even after he did get going. Like, I don't want to not arguing that point at all, but like Karl-Anthony Towns has looked like at times with this New York Knicks team, just like he has not quite yet learned how to fit in. This was a game where he fit in and he dominated. And so I'm going to make it more about Karl-Anthony Towns just because I'm glad to see Karl-Anthony Towns have this type of performance in a game where everybody really played well on top of that. But Karl-Anthony Towns shined bright last night to me.
Oh, if you want to know more, check out Locked On Knicks. He goes deep into even deeper into the Cat Brunson dynamic, the pick and roll, and what it opens up for guys like Josh Hart, who also had some nice moments in that game as well. Okay, if you like what you heard today, subscribe to Locked On NBA wherever you get podcasts, including YouTube. And thanks for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. Enjoy tonight's action. Eat lots of candy. Be kind to each other. And we will see you right back here to wrap up the week on Locked On NBA.